Greetings, brothers and sisters. My topic today is when the U.S. visa is worth more than life or death. The end of the Cuban Medical Assistance program in Caribbean and Central American countries is a public health disaster for the region, according to the Jamaican Foreign Minister. In a March 2025 statement, the program was vital to the country, but almost a year later, the government succumbed to U.S. pressure and terminated the program anyway. The impact of the loss to the Caribbean region is incalculable. Most of the governments in the region have provided very little hard data to quantify the loss. Anyone who is familiar with the inner workings of Caribbean governments know the numbers certainly exist but are unavailable to the public for political reasons. But thanks to social media we have eyewitness reports of the immediate consequences of Jamaica's termination of the Cuban Doctors program. From St. Joseph's Hospital in Kingston, there is confusion and anguish by scores of people who turned up for appointments on 9th March at the eye clinic once staffed by the Cubans. Because of the widespread public disaffection caused by the loss of the Cuban doctors, according to the Jamaica Gleaner newspaper, the Minister of Health was forced to hold a press briefing with local media on the same day of the St. Joseph's Hospital debacle. They report the following. The Ministry of Health and Wellness is making a plea for the public's patience and cooperation as it assesses the island-wide impact and implements contingencies to mitigate disruptions caused by the impending severance of ties with Cuban health professionals providing their services in Jamaica. From that Gleaner report, we also learn much about the significance of the Cuban Medical Assistance program to Jamaica prior to its termination. FAF. A total of 260 Cuban healthcare workers are in the public healthcare system, apart from 188 medical professionals in the various public hospitals and clinic across 3 regions. The Cubans but assigned to specialized facilities. 31 at the University Hospital of the West Indies, UHWI, 18 attached to St. Joseph's Hospital's Jamaica Cuba Eye Care Program, 7 operate in the government's public health lab. Based on the Jamaican data, we get a better idea of the scope and significance of the Cuban medical assistance to the various countries in the region, with populations ranging from 11.1 million in Honduras to 60,000 in Dominica, with Jamaica in the middle at 2.8 million. It is now crystal clear that not only Jamaica, but almost all the counties of the region who had Cuban doctors succumbed to direct and sustained pressure by the Trump administration and especially Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a major anti-Cuban hawk in American politics. Ever since coming to office in 2025, Marco Rubio and company have done their best to demonize the medical assistance program. The U.S. frames the program as exploitative, forced labor, human trafficking, or modern slavery, despite Caribbean governments insisting that the program meets local and international labor laws. To get his way, Rubio has focused on visa restrictions as the main coercive tool, combined with diplomatic pressure and public warnings. On August 13, 2025, he announced visa restrictions on officials from Grenada, Caribbean, and Cuba itself for so-called complicity in the coercive forced labor export scheme. Their family members were included. With the exception of the Bahamas, in 2025 most Caribbean leaders, led by St. Vincent and the Grenadines under then Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves, pushed back against Rubio and the State Department, providing evidence of voluntary participation in the medical assistance program and emphasizing that the health needs of their population was a priority. But Venezuela became a tipping point. After the U.S. succeeded in taking control of the Venezuelan government by abducting Maduro and his wife, imprisoning them, and putting Delcy Rodriguez in charge, they signaled that up next for regime change was Cuba, to force the Cubans to quickly make a deal. In the words of Donald Trump, the Americans have increased their unilateral sanctions and embargoes that have existed since the 1960s. January 29, 2026. President Trump declared a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, and National Emergencies Act, citing Cuba's alleged support for hostile actors, including Russia, China, Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah, as an unusual and extraordinary threat. The order authorizes tariffs, potentially secondary or additional ad valorem tariffs, on goods imported into the U.S. from any country that directly or indirectly sells, supplies, or provides oil to Cuba. This aims to deter third-party suppliers and create a de facto fuel blockade. It took effect January 30, 2026. Most experts have this described as a major escalation, building on prior policies but specifically targeting energy lifelines. A secondary target of the executive order was creating an overall environment of heightened economic and diplomatic coercion against Havana and its partners. Specific actions focused on the medical program include public condemnations and warnings. U.S. embassies, e.g., in Bridgetown, Barbados, posted statements and graphics in early February 2026, warning that participating governments risk complicity in forced labor, with phrases like "the United States will hold nations accountable." Rubio reiterated calls to end the program during regional engagements, including at the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in late February 2026. Visa restrictions and threats. Expanded use of visa revocations or denials for foreign officials, including from Caribbean nations, involved in the program or linked to Cuban labor exports. This tactic, used in 2025, continued into 2026, pressuring leaders fearing travel bans or other sanctions. Diplomatic engagements. Direct outreach, such as U.S. officials meeting with governments to push for changes. As a result, starting January 2026, several Caribbean nations that once resisted the American pressure have folded when it comes to the Cuban Doctors. They are ending, phasing out, or reforming agreements, often citing unresolved contract terms, labor standards, or compliance issues. They pretend it is not due to U.S. pressure when the stated reasons just happen to coincide with the talking points of Trump and Rubio. Jamaica, in early March 2026, ended a 50-year program after failing to renegotiate terms post-2023 expiration. About 277 Cuban professionals withdrawn from the country. Jamaica's government denied U.S. influence was decisive, but Cuba's foreign ministry called it a yield to Washington. The move has already affected public health services, as evidenced by pictures and videos of an eye clinic in Kingston swarming with patients unable to get services provided by Cuban doctors. Guyana decided in February 2026 but announced in early March that they had terminated a nearly 50-year partnership. Guyana unilaterally proposed full salaries to workers instead of routing most payments to Havana, as was the case hitherto. Cuba chose to withdraw all 200 personnel. Honduras ended deals early, according to March reports. Bahamas and Antigua and other countries signaled shifts to direct worker contracts in late January, early 2026 to comply with U.S. demands and avoid visa risks. Guatemala phasing out in February 2026. In conclusion, there are some obvious lessons from the termination of the Cuban Medical Assistance program. While regional leaders pretend they make their decisions free of outside pressure, the U.S. exercises significant coercive power over the governments and peoples of the region, forcing them to make decisions against their own interests. The public health needs of the Caribbean population is of minor interest to the United States in its desire to maintain domination of the region. Power to grant or deny U.S. visa and fear of sanctions is a potent tool to coerce or even blackmail Caribbean leaders. Independence and sovereignty does not exist for most Caribbean countries, with the notable exception of Cuba. In the case of the Cubans, their sovereignty has come at a great cost, a price that most countries in the region cannot bear. Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Enough respect until we meet again.